r/NoSleep. I'm a magician, and the illusionist on stage just made a man disappear. For real. I wasn't exactly thrilled about attending the dark enchantment show, but as a lifelong magician, I figured it couldn't hurt to see what the buzz was about. My friend had insisted, raving about the young illusionist who'd been making waves with his impossible tricks. Apparently, he'd even outshone some of the top veterans in the field. My curiosity won out, so I went. The venue was unassuming, but inside, the stage was adorned with strange artifacts, cracked mirrors, antique lanterns, and velvet curtains with intricate symbols embroidered in deep red. I took my front row seat, prepared to dissect whatever sleight of hand tricks he might have up his sleeve. When the lights dimmed, he stepped onto the stage. He was young, maybe 20, with a confident grin and an air of mystery that commanded attention. He introduced himself simply as Luca, and wasted no time jumping into his first act. His tricks were mind-bending. He produced flames from his hands that seemed to change color at will, and birds appeared out of thin air, swirling around him before vanishing in puffs of smoke. I was sure I'd be able to catch the mechanics, but each act left me baffled. This wasn't the usual smoke and mirrors routine. Then came his final act, one he called the Passage of Shadows. He announced he would need a volunteer for this one, and after a moment of suspense, a man in the back raised his hand. He was a burly guy, clearly intrigued but also nervous, with a look that said he was trying to keep his cool. The man stepped onto the stage, and Luca instructed him to stand inside a tall black cabinet, lined with mirrors. It looked simple, almost bare, no false doors, no partitions. Once the man was inside, Luca pulled the curtain in front of the cabinet, obscuring it from view. Luca then began to speak in a low voice, reciting words in a language that sounded ancient. The atmosphere grew tense, and I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. He drew a long, thin blade from his coat and held it up for the audience to see. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he thrust the blade through the curtain, into the cabinet. There was a gasp from the audience, but no sound from inside. He pulled the blade out, then drove it in again, at a slightly different angle. Silence. He repeated this several times, each motion more deliberate than the last. I gripped my seat, feeling my pulse quicken. Finally, with a flourish, he stepped back and pulled the curtain aside, revealing an empty cabinet. The audience erupted in applause, assuming it was all part of the act. But I wasn't so sure. Something felt wrong. I'd seen every type of disappearing act imaginable, and this felt different. Luca smiled, taking a bow, but his eyes briefly flicked to mine, almost as if he was sizing me up. The applause died down, and the man who'd volunteered didn't reappear. Luca ended the show with a theatrical wave, but there was no hint of the volunteer. The audience started to file out, but I stayed seated, watching as the stage crew came in to dismantle the set. I walked up to one of the stagehands, a grizzled older man with a deep frown. "Where's the volunteer?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The man gave me a puzzled look. "The volunteer?" He looked around, then shrugged. "I guess he left?" I didn't feel reassured, so I decided to wait around, hoping I'd catch a glimpse of Luca leaving. I wanted to ask him how he'd pulled off the trick, if only to put my mind at ease. But he never came out. Eventually, the theater staff started urging me to leave. I wandered out into the cold night air, still unsettled. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the memory of the man's wide eyes as he'd stepped into that cabinet. His excitement. His uncertainty. And then, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished from reality itself. The next morning, I scoured the news for any mention of the show, any reports of a missing person. There was nothing. No one seemed to be looking for him, and it was as if he'd never existed. Then, a few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was black, the address written in a strange, angular script. Inside, I found a note with only one line. "A true magician understands the nature of sacrifice." There was no signature, but I knew who it was from. I felt a chill creep through me, colder than anything I'd ever felt on stage. I tucked the note away, determined to forget what I'd seen. But some nights, I swear I can still hear the faint echo of applause in that whisper in the dark. A true magician understands. As days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long, every reflection felt wrong. The unease settled deep in my bones, but I dismissed it as paranoia, until I received the second letter. This one arrived late one night, slipping through the crack beneath my door. It was the same black envelope, the same eerie, angular handwriting. But this time, there were 2 words scrawled hastily in red ink across the paper inside. Come alone. An address was scribbled below, leading to an old part of the city, where forgotten buildings leaned together in the shadows. I knew better than to go, but curiosity, the curse of every magician, compelled me. I waited until dusk the next day, then followed the address. The location brought me to a crumbling, abandoned theater, its facade barely visible beneath years of grime and neglect. I pushed open the rusted doors, finding myself in a vast, darkened space that smelled of mildew and dust. The silence felt as thick as a curtain. A single light flickered on, illuminating the stage, where Luca was waiting. "Welcome," he said, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I knew you'd come." I stayed silent, staring him down. He hadn't changed since I'd seen him last, still impossibly young, still exuding that eerie confidence. He gestured to the stage, inviting me to join him. Reluctantly, I climbed the stairs and stood a few feet away, feeling the weight of his gaze. "You're here because you saw something you weren't meant to," he began, his eyes glinting. "You're a magician, but you don't understand the power you're playing with. Magic is more than tricks, more than sleight of hand and misdirection. Real magic requires sacrifice." He circled around me as he spoke, his voice a whisper that echoed through the empty theater. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. "Where is the volunteer?" I asked, my voice barely a murmur. The question had been haunting me since that night. I needed to know. A strange smile crept onto his face. "He's somewhere else now. In a place where shadows breathe, and light dares not follow." I gave him to the other side. "A trade, if you will." "Trade?" I echoed, disbelief knotting my throat. What could be worth sacrificing a man's life? "Everything." His voice was cold, devoid of remorse. "In exchange, I can pull flames from the void, conjure storms from silence, bend the very laws of nature. But these gifts come with a price. For every act, every miracle, there must be a loss." My stomach turned. "That's not magic," I spat. That's murder." "Ah, but it is magic," he corrected, leaning close. "Magic that people crave, magic that they'll sell their souls to witness. Real magic doesn't happen without consequence. But you know that, don't you?" I tried to step back, but something held me rooted in place. It felt like the air itself had thickened, trapping me. Luca's grin widened as he watched me struggle. "You're afraid," he said softly. "But you don't need to be. I see potential in you. I've read your work, seen your little illusions. But what if you could do so much more? What if you could wield power beyond imagination?" I shook my head, rejecting his words. But his voice was mesmerizing, tugging at something deep within me, an itch I'd never quite been able to scratch. "Think about it," he murmured. "No more sleight of hand, no more hours spent practicing tricks. Real power. Power that doesn't rely on illusion but on something far older, something raw and untamed." He stepped back, leaving me gasping for air as the invisible hold released me. I felt sweat trickle down my spine, and I clutched my hands to keep them from shaking. "What do you want from me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely more than a whisper. His expression softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something human in his eyes. "I want to offer you a choice. Join me. Learn the true art. Become more than just a magician. Or," he trailed off, his gaze turning dark, "or walk away. But know that once you've seen this path, it will haunt you for the rest of your life. There will be no peace, only questions and shadows." I stared at him, feeling 1,000 emotions collide within me: fear, anger, curiosity, and, to my horror, temptation. I could feel the allure of his words tugging at me, promising something beyond what I'd ever imagined. But then I remembered the volunteer, remembered his face as he'd stepped into that cabinet, never to be seen again. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want your kind of magic." Luca's face fell, his expression hardening. He seemed to grow darker, his shadow stretching until it enveloped the entire stage. "So be it," he whispered. "But know this, you've seen what lies beyond. And now it will never leave you." With a final, chilling smile, he raised his hand, and the theater plunged into darkness. I stumbled backward, feeling my way off the stage. When I turned around, the entire theater was empty. Luca was gone, as if he'd never been there. The only evidence of our conversation was the lingering scent of smoke and the faint echo of his voice in my mind. "A true magician understands the nature of sacrifice." The words echoed long after I left that abandoned theater. And as the years passed, I found myself drawn to darker and darker acts, testing the boundaries of my art, inching closer to the line I'd sworn never to cross. I became known for illusions that defied explanation, acts that left audiences speechless, acts that haunted them long after the curtains closed. But every time I performed, I felt Luca's presence, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. And with each new show, I wondered if I'd ever truly left that stage, or if, in some way, I'd been bound to it forever.